Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bernie, go ahead, please.
Well,
Yeah.
The session, everything about the session was a backdrop of a $1.6 billion deficit that had been we've been aware of for 5, 6, 7 months, and the backdrop was that the public in the survey I did in December, basically talking about the continuing deficits and lack of money, but the public didn't want to hear about it. They were tuned out. We asked them about personal income tax, property taxes, sales taxes, any kind of tax, and they didn't want to fund it. They didn't want to pay any more to fund the deficit. So most legislators heard that from back home. Polls showed it, whoever ran the survey, so they came in and started looking at, as Jindal called it, corporate welfare. And then they started going after exemptions. And, of course, that wasn't enough, and they added a 1 penny tax to businesses on utilities. So the backdrop was always bad for the legislature because the public isn't buying that they should be paying more personal taxes. So the legislature went after the areas that they would get the least resistance on a day-to-day basis. So they went after all these exemptions, solar and inventory tax credits and movie industries, and then, of course, the utility tax. But, you know, so that's where they went, and that's where the session ended, with them raising taxes primarily on businesses. Now, legislators are saying, oh, wait a minute, we didn't raise any taxes. We actually just reduced exemptions. But yeah, there was a tax in there, the tax on utility tax. So, you know, that dominated the session. Everything else was of little or no consequence. There was some of your usual legislation, you know, with social issues and cleaning up stuff or changing this. But the entire session was about how to fix a $1.6 billion deficit, and literally most of it is quick fixes that the next governor will still have to deal with. So, yeah, Jim's correct on the daily, day-to-day basis was all about trying to find revenue, of which they eventually did, but it was, as we all know, it was complicated by Jindal's insistence that no new net taxes were collected. So it was a weird background, but I'll say this much, that the next governor and everything the legislature did ignored one really important fact. With a $1.6 billion deficit, Louisiana voters had no interest in paying another dime. So how are you going to fix anything? The legislature may have come up with this money this time, but Louisiana can't go much further, and they can't fund higher ed or health care or anything else when the public's not willing to pay for it. So to me, what came out of this session was that, in looking at the surveys and listening to the average person, they don't want to fund government in Louisiana. They don't want to pay another dime. The legislature got away with taking away exemptions and taking money away from business, but the underlying problem that is still there is that there is nobody, the majority of people in Louisiana do not want to pay one more dime out of their pocket to fund state government. So it's a temporary fix, but the real problem's still there, and people don't like or trust, don't believe, think their money's being wasted, you name it. They'll come up with an excuse why they don't want to pay additional taxes out of their pocket to fix anything or even to pay for higher education.
Jim, go ahead.
Well, I think Bernie's right on the money, and you know, I think that your listeners out there and the individual, the taxpayers, as Bernie said, he polls this. He's very accurate in what he's saying. Don't want to pay any more money. Well, you got to put it in the focus of, say, you and I. You're a person with your family. You're trying to pay your bills. Your mortgage is on your home. You can't really borrow any money, but you've got a great amount of additional debt. And so what do? You got to use what you have. You've got to work with what you have. And to me, the legislature, as well as the governor, were highly irresponsible in not using what they had. You take the Department of Economic Development. We have to start calling that the Louisiana Welfare Office. The give-outs that they've given, the billions and billions of dollars given out, and then we don't monitor that money. We don't even know what we get in return. You take the nonprofits. We've got nonprofits galore in this state with serious questions as to how that money's being spent, not being audited properly. Many nonprofits should be getting that kind of money. We don't get the better bang for the buck in higher education. The report came out last week about schools like University of New Orleans, Southern down in New Orleans, 11% graduation rate after 6 years. Steve, that campus should be shut down. But the legislature doesn't want to do this. They want to stick their fingers in the dike, pacify the governor, and say it's going to be someone's problem next year. Well, as Bernie articulately said, it's going to be a massive problem next year. These business taxes that were put on business, many of them expire, some after 1 year, all after 3 years. So we haven't balanced the budget. There's been what this legislature, this Republican conservative legislature, and this Republican conservative governor are going to go down in history as raising more taxes than any time in the history of the state, number one, and number two, loosening up the reins on marijuana. That's going to be their heart. That's going to be the focus of what they'll be remembered for. It's almost on the verge of being malfeasance in office, and there ought to be a pretty good justification for voting anybody who's in office right now. So on the short view, Bernie's got it right. On the long view, where is the leadership going to say, hey, we got to live within our means? Only voice I've heard even halfway addressing this is the Treasurer, John Kennedy, and he's been ignored by the legislature as well as the governor.
Okay, we have
Greg Hilburn,
the Monroe
News Star on
the Hangout.
He's calling in by phone, of course.
Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, Stephen.
Now you were there
at the scene of the crime. So you're still there tonight.
Yes, I'm still here.
So if you don't mind.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. So why don't you give us an idea as to what happened from your perspective?
You were there.
You were there yesterday. Go ahead.
Well, in the end, as I suspected, the legislature blinked when the House blinked and voted for the SAVE measure, which I'm sure you guys have already talked about, in order to
we have not.
avert what they considered, what could be, damaging cuts to higher ed, health care, public health care. All of the, I talked to the LSU president yesterday. All of the higher ed officials, all of the brass were there lined up to, encourage these lawmakers to vote on SAVE, so this cobbled together budget could be passed out, and they could be funded at least for a year or maybe less. But to get to the next, like you said, to get to the next corner, to get the can to the next corner, and that's and it was frantic. I've covered the legislature on and off for a long time, but the end of the day yesterday was the most frenzied and confused in the House that I remember seeing at the end. It was wild.
Let me make a comment about that, because I actually was watching online. It seemed to me that it was a real power play. In other words, here you had two guys in the House who were retiring. One the Speaker, and of course you had the representative from down here in New Orleans. And that took an hour. I mean, my God, you had an hour at the very time, and Governor Jindal comes in during those moments, takes an hour away from whatever he's doing just to be there and to lobby. During the farewell speeches, you had Jeff Arnold, who's retiring, and he had his family there, and he's done a great job. And not to take anything away from Jeff Arnold at all, or from the Speaker. But my God, how in the world, when you have all these bills still yet to be discussed, there's no report that has been disseminated to the rest of the legislature, and there's no debate down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Steve,
Go
let
ahead.
me insert what the problem. Jim mentioned it. They went into this session with no taxpayer. Most taxpayers in Louisiana are saying, we're not going to give you another dime for higher education. We're not going to give you another dime for health care. Whatever you ask me for to fund the state of Louisiana's budget, I'm not interested in paying another nickel. And that's what we have today, and it's still there, and it's adamant. People are adamant. And what they did was they went and found the easiest way to get around that. But the problem is still there, and you call them shenanigans or whatever, but the public has watched this for years. They watched it. They watched this and read about the SAVE Act. So the next governors come, whoever the next governor is and the next legislature, they've got to deal with the public's unwillingness to give them another dime, and they can't go back to business. So it's not so much what happened this session, which is a Band-Aid, but at some point in time, somebody's got to fix the problem with the public and their unwillingness to want to pay another dime to the state of Louisiana to run state government. And until you fix that, I don't know how the state of Louisiana and the legislature, why would you want to go back to the legislature with the public's disdain for paying additional money to the state of Louisiana? Look, when college-educated people in Louisiana, when you ask them, do you want to fund higher education to avoid a huge budget deficit or to shut down universities, you know what the response is? And these are the educated people. No, I don't want to pay any money. So we've got a really serious problem that is somebody's got to address at some point in time, which is you can't keep running government when the public has no confidence in how it's being spent, period. And that's an underlying problem that somebody better come up with a way, to get the public more interested in helping fund the government that they're getting.
The Bernie? I'm sorry, Jim?
Yeah, well, and Bernie is dead on. As far as the specific question you asked, I would tell you this, that there's really nothing new about getting pushed at the last minute. You're always saying you're going to make it work. Back when I was in the Senate, the deadline was midnight. You didn't cut it down, and oh my gosh, the tension and was the pressure, and the alcohol-infused debates that went on were something. I remember one occasion where J.E. Jumonville, a big gregarious senator that lived in the Baton Rouge area, was fighting to get a technical school, vocational school over in his district. And there was a given, we were approaching midnight, and everybody was saying, you got to do something, we got to vote, it's almost midnight. I'm sitting right next to Jumonville. He pulls off his boot, his cowboy boot, and he throws it as hard as he can at the clock in back of us so that the clock would stop and not hit midnight. So there's some pretty rancorous stories as to what happened in the past. I think the problem this time around, Steve, is there was so much acrimony on the part of the public. Jindal's unpopularity, his leaving the state, his failure to lead, no real vision out of the legislature, no real leadership emerging. The leaders internally behind the scenes trying to make it work with an uncooperative governor. All that in the mix created this climate that at the very end, it just went crazy. And so I think that does happen in times in the past, but there's a little bit more predictability, and there's a little bit better leadership from the governor's office than we've seen right now. That made it look terrible. And Bernie's right, there's a huge lack of confidence in the legislature, a lack of people wanting to spend money. That's why I say the next governor, whoever he or she may be, I hope they go back to the drawing board and say, okay, let's start with what we have. Let's get a lot more bang out of the box than we have right now. We gave all this new money, not new money, but higher education says, we came to pursue greatly. There was not one effort by any legislator to say, what kind of return are we getting on this money? How efficient are these universities? Who's teaching our kids? Why does Louisiana rank at the bottom of every southern state? Why isn't there one major university in the top 150 in the country? Why is LSU not second-rate but a third-rate educational system? So as a consequence, legislature gave out the money to try to put their fingers in the dike, but did not demand any accountability. And as Bernie says, that's going to be the challenge for the next governor and the new legislature.